Hey there, friends. I want to welcome you back to A New Thing with Cyndi. You know, one of my favorite verses is Isaiah 43:19, where God says, see, or he says, behold, I'm doing a new thing. And now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? And I absolutely love that scripture because God is always moving. He's always creating, and he's always inviting us to step into something new and fresh with him. And so that's what this podcast is all about. Here on A New Thing, I get to sit down with authors, creatives, entrepreneurs, leaders who are courageously stepping into that new thing that God is calling them to do for this season in their life. And so today's episode is especially meaningful for me because it's part of our Women Influencing Nashville series, where I have the joy of highlighting incredible women from our Influence Women's chapter, which is a beautiful community of godly women, creatives, leaders, communicators, storytellers who are really using their gifts to impact the world for God's kingdom. And so today's guest is going to take us on an incredible journey through scripture, history, and the ancient paths that point us straight to Jesus. And so today I'm joined by Gail Carraway, author of Journey on the Ancient Path, The Way of the Shepherd. Gail has a deep passion for uncovering the Jewish culture surrounding the life of Jesus and helping believers understand biblical traditions, prophecies of the Messiah, writings, and the historical context that reveal the richness of God's redemptive plan for us. And so in her book, she explores prophecies about the Messiah's birth and how they were foretold in the Old Testament and fulfilling the life of Jesus. And I just felt like, with yesterday being a day where we welcome the Lord, Palm Sunday, and us being smack dab in the middle of Easter and celebrating the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, the Messiah, I just couldn't feel any more perfect to have the guests that we're having today. And so would you please help me welcome Gail Carraway?
Well, hello.
Hi, Gail. How are you?
I'm well, Cyndi. How are you?
I'm doing so well. I want to thank you again for being a part of A New Thing. And then, of course, with our Women Influencing Nashville series, it's such a joy and a blessing to have you on here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and so one of the things that I really love about you and your style as an author, and you told me this from the very beginning when I said I would love to have you on the podcast. You said, well, my writing's a little bit different. You know, it's not just this self-help, or it's not only a novel, but just the way that you incorporate the prophecies and the Bible into your teachings and into your novel and your storytelling. Talk to us a little bit about how this came to be, and then I want to dive into your book and then what you have coming in the near future.
Yes. Well, I was working a secular job several years ago in IT for a global company, and a young lady came to work with us, and she was from India, and she did not know what Christmas was about. So I tried to explain to her what we were celebrating at Christmas, but then I felt inspired to write a book about the birth of Jesus. And the story is told from the perspective of the shepherds in Bethlehem. So it's a little bit different than most books about the birth of Jesus. I was already learning Hebrew, and I was teaching on the Jewish feasts at my church, so I incorporated those elements in the book. And I also show where all of the prophecies about the birth of the Messiah were first foretold, and then where they were fulfilled. So the book reads like a novel because I created characters, the shepherds in Bethlehem, and I show where their culture, how they prayed, how they lived their life 2,000 years ago, because to really understand Jesus, you need to understand the culture that he lived in. So that was the inspiration for the book, was a friend from India who did not know what Christmas was about.
Wow, that's amazing. And prior to you writing the book or being inspired to write the book, had you ever had a desire to write a book?
No, I had never written a book for the public, I had done some technical writing as part of my job, but never had written a book. So this was really taking me out of my comfort zone. And I just really had to trust God that if he was leading me in this direction, that he would help me to write the book.
Wow, I love that. And again, it just really ties back to the whole idea of God doing this new thing. I think sometimes when we get an idea, we could easily shut that down. And you could have easily shut this down and said, well, I only do technical writing, and so this is just a great idea. However, I'm going to stick to what I know. What did that look like for you to say, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and just do something completely new, but something that I'm so very much stirred up to do?
Well, obviously, I took it to the Lord in prayer. I had to pray about what to write. I wanted to make sure what I was writing would be pleasing to him. I did a ton of research. I already knew a lot about the Hebrew feast, the Jewish feast, and Hebrew, but I just had to trust God. And then what happened, which I was not expecting at all, is that several months into the writing experience, I started having dreams about what to put in the book. And I believe those dreams were from God. And so that was really God trying to help me understand what should be in the book. And I even had two dreams that had music, and I had never written music before. And one of the songs that I wrote was actually, it was birthed out of a dream while writing this book.
Wow. Now, had you ever written songs before that?
No. It is a brand new thing.
Oh my goodness, I love that. This is why I tell people, don't ever put God in a box. I mean,
Right.
your yes to him to write this book opened up literally a whole new world for you.
Right. And that's true, because as I was researching what to write for the book, researching the culture and the history, I learned that there were some men called the Essenes, and they were the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So as I delved into learning about the Essenes, I've learned so much. And I did put some of that in the first book, but actually, when I was having those dreams that I believe came from God, some of the dreams were about the life of Jesus. So then I realized I'm really supposed to write a second book about the ministry of Jesus. So in the second book, I will include a lot of information about the Essenes that most people have never heard about.
Oh, that's exciting. And I love all of this. I love the history of the Bible. When I was younger, I didn't care so much for history. And then the older I got, I would ask myself, why did I not pay more attention to history?
Right.
and now you try to go back and read from authors such as yourself. Right. And so I really love that. How exciting for you to be able to have that idea to merge all that God is giving you to merge it. It just sounds like a very beautiful way to write a story, to tell a story.
Yes, and I just give credit to God, because he's the one that has directed my steps. He is our good shepherd, and he will direct you in the path that you need to go. And so as I was learning about the Essenes, I started teaching about the Essenes, and now I send out a newsletter about the Essenes, and people are astonished at what we are learning. The Essenes had priests and prophets and scribes, and the prophets were known to be 100% accurate with their prophecies. This is during the time of Jesus.
Wow. And so talk to us a little bit about that. And I'm not trying to take this so much into this direction, because I really do want to continue focusing on you and your book and your writing. But, I feel like we're just seeing so much of what Jesus prophesied unfolding right before our very eyes. And, you'd have to almost be blind to not realize that what Jesus prophesied and what we read in the New Testament and in the Old, a lot of it has already come to pass or is coming to pass. Talk to us about the prophecies, because you talk about the prophecies leading up to the birth of the Messiah. But talk to us just about, the power of prophecies in general, and why should we, as people of God, but even people that maybe don't even know the Lord, why should we pay attention to the prophetic words that have been prophesied in the Bible?
Well, the prophetic words really tell us what is going to happen. Even in our day, Jesus told his disciples about the things that would happen at the end of the age. And that phrase, the end of the age, people wondered for years, what does that mean? Well, when we discovered the writings of the Essenes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have a word called the age, and there were 3 ages before now. And then there's a final age, which is the millennial age. So when Jesus talked about the end of the age, we now know, based on the writings of the Essenes, what he was referring to. And then that helps us prepare for what is coming, because not all prophecy has been fulfilled yet. We are living, I believe, in the end times, and there are many prophecies about what will happen in the end times.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's for sure. And I know that you and I had conversation, and I'm not sure if this is in your The Way of the Shepherd, or if this is in the book that you'll be releasing soon in the near future. But you talked about a specific year that we have not yet hit. I believe you said, maybe, was it 2050?
Well, what happens in the Essenes, they have an age. We are currently living in what is called the Age of Grace, and it will officially end in 2075. And then, according to the Essenes, the millennial reign will begin. So right now, we are living in the last 50 years, the last Jubilee cycle before the millennial reign. So everything that has been prophesied to take place in the end times should take place within the next 50 years.
Wow. Wake up call, people.
Right.
Let's please wake up. And this has nothing to do with this particular topic, but there are times where I feel like I just want to sit down and post a video about, do you know where we're at, in prophetic word? And I don't know much about the Essenes, but what I do know from what Jesus talks about, the wars and the rumors of wars and nation rising against nation and everything that we're seeing now, things that are taking place in Jerusalem and Israel. I just want people to know, like, we really are in what you said, the last days.
Right.
So how long did it take you to write your book? I know that you released your book a few years back, but from the time that the Lord speaks to you and you have this stirring up in your heart to write it, how long did it take you to do the research and get your book done and published?
It took about a year.
Wow.
It wasn't that long. I was still working a full-time job, and so I could only write on the weekends or when I had spare time. But I already knew the Jewish feast. I already knew the story of Jesus. Everyone knows, if you're a Christian, you know the story of the birth of Jesus. So most of the research was about the culture of the time within which he was born. But it took about a year to write the book, and then to get the artwork done and get the book published. So maybe a total of 2 years.
I love that. Well, congratulations, first of all. I'm just in awe of this. A lot of times I will talk to people that'll ask me, well, how long did it take my last book? But I co-wrote it with a dear friend of mine, and it took us a little under a year. And what I tell people is, once you know that this is something you need to write and a message you need to get out, then you need to commit to that.
Right.
And that's exactly what, and you're saying you worked a full-time job, and people might say, well, how did you do that? And you say, I know that for you to do this, Gail, you had to make time, intentional time, to get your book done, to work on it, to write it, so congratulations on that. I do want to talk a little bit about the dream factor, because God gives us dreams when we're awake, but you talked a little bit about having these dreams when you were asleep. And sometimes you can think, well, a dream, you wake up and you think, oh, maybe that was just the pizza that I had yesterday, or I was just really tired. But how do you know when it's something that God has given you versus, oh, what a great dream that was, and then you go on and totally miss this God-given dream, like what he did for you?
Well, for me, I just felt so certain that the dream was from God. and it related to what I was writing about, but it was different and new. And I just somehow knew that this was supposed to go into the book. There was just a knowing in my spirit that this is what God is asking me to do, to put this information in the book.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you work with anybody to writing the song, or you just wrote it yourself and got it copywritten and it was your book, your song?
I wrote it myself, but my brother, who has since passed away, he was a gifted musician, and I had him to write the score because I did not know how to write the score for music, but I sang the song to him. So I had the melody and I had the words, and then he put it to written music. And then I actually hired someone to sing the song, and it's on my website.
Oh, wow. Okay, wonderful. I'm excited to see what that's all about. Okay, so now the Essenes, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I would love for us to dive a little bit more into the Essenes, because I do believe there might be believers or Christians who have no clue really, who how, when were the Essenes established, and are they in the Bible? And even the Dead Sea Scrolls, when were the Dead Sea Scrolls found? Can you give us some history on just the whole community and the fact side of the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they wrote, the prophecies, their calendar? So much of that does play into where we're at today, but I think many don't have a clue.
Right.
This is the first time they're hearing about the Essenes.
Right. And talking about the Essenes could really take another podcast. It could take an hour or longer. And I actually teach on this at my church. But the Essenes were the men who scholars say wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they lived in a community called Qumran on the shore of the Dead Sea. I was in Israel in 2023, and we went to Qumran, and our tour guide said, "We now know that John the Baptist was an Essene." So we never knew that before, but when these scrolls were first found, it was in 1947, but they were placed in the hands of someone who could read Hebrew in 1948. So as these scrolls were being translated into English, initially they were just kept in Israel. But around the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the Israeli community released copies of these scrolls to the world. So then Americans who knew how to read the Hebrew could translate the scrolls. And there's a gentleman, a Dr. Johnson, who I followed, that he has copies of all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he understood Hebrew, and he realized they had a special calendar which counts time from creation. And they found scrolls that were written by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all 12 sons. They also had a calendar that they wrote about, and they had their prophecies. But generally, the Essenes were in existence about 200 to 300 years before Jesus was born. And they believed that they had the true calendar, so they left Jerusalem to go to Qumran because they were really forced out of the Jewish temple. They believed the Pharisees had the wrong calendar. And what we have learned is the calendar that the Pharisees used was actually from Babylon. And so there was really a civil war a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. And the Essenes were the minority. So they moved to Qumran and took their calendar with them and took all the scrolls from the temple library to Qumran, where they were hidden for 2,000 years until we found them.
Wow.
And that's why this information is so new, because it's only been in the last 20 years that people that know English and Hebrew have read them, translated them into English, and now we understand all of this information that we never knew before.
Well, yeah. And this is the first time I'm ever even hearing that John the Baptist was in a scene as well, and I just think just so beautiful. I'm always in awe, and I marvel at not just the intentionality, just there's so many hidden mysteries in the Bible and in the dots connecting and in the history. And yet when things start to be revealed, and how interesting that things, even with regards to the Dead Sea Scrolls, have been revealed within the last 50 plus years, but just the timing of God for things to surface and to unfold and for
Right.
that revelation. But that's so powerful. Well, I'm so excited that you've studied about the Essenes, and I believe you're working on a second book now.
Yeah.
And this will also include more about the ministry of Jesus, but it will also include about the Essenes as well.
Yes.
And so talk to us a little bit what you would like to, not too much, if only share what you want to about your new book.
Yes, I'm writing the second book. It's part of a trilogy. It will be Journey on the Ancient Path, The Truth of the Shepherd, and it follows the ministry of Jesus and, of course, his crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And so I will include quite a bit of information about the Essenes now that we know what they wrote and prophesied. In fact, they prophesied the name of the Messiah would be Yeshua, which is the Hebrew name that Mary gave to Jesus. That's just one of their prophecies. They had many prophecies. But one thing that I found fascinating, and I will include this in the second book, is that according to the Essene calendar, Passover always begins on a Tuesday night. So if that's true, then Jesus and the disciples had the Last Supper on a Tuesday night. Then they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus would have been arrested on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday night, Tuesday. Actually, he would have been arrested Wednesday morning, but then crucified Wednesday afternoon. So if that's true, then he was buried in the grave on Wednesday before sunset, because the Pharisees then said they had to celebrate their Passover. So there were really 2 dates for Passover, the Essene Passover and then the Pharisee Passover. So if Jesus was crucified on Wednesday evening, he would have been in the grave. And Jesus made a prophecy about himself. He said, just as Jonah was in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Well, for years, scholars have said, we thought Jesus was crucified on Good Friday, but that doesn't give you 3 days and 3 nights in the grave.
Right.
So according to the Essene calendar, if Jesus was crucified on Wednesday afternoon, he was in the grave Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night, 3 full nights. He was also in the grave 3 full days, all day, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. He rose sometimes Saturday night, Sunday morning. So that makes sense. The Essene calendar confirms what Jesus himself said about a prophecy about his death, burial, and resurrection. And we never knew that until just recently.
Isn't that something? There's so much in the word that we don't know. I mean, so much.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I took 2 semesters of Hebrew in seminary that I started to understand, even within the Hebrew language, in the root of the word,
Yes.
that there's a whole symbol or a meaning in that alone.
Yes.
And it was like, wow, somehow some of the word, well, not some, but how their Hebrew letters depict photos and imagery that, we miss so much because
Yes.
we're of this Western civilization. And so I always have a deep admiration for individuals such as yourself that are just really studying and tackling these other aspects of the Bible and the times of Jesus. It's important to know and understand these feasts and holidays, and now possibly this calendar, because that helps to explain why there's some of these like little question marks and holes when you're reading the Bible.
Right. Yeah, because what seems like a contradiction in the Bible, we're learning now when you understand the Essenes and what they wrote, it explains those seemingly contradictions, because I've heard for years Jesus was crucified on Passover. But then how did he celebrate Passover with the disciples at the Last Supper if he was crucified on Passover? That never made sense. Well, now it does, because there were 2 different dates for Passover. And he apparently observed the Essene date for Passover, not the Pharisee date. And we know Jesus rebuked the Pharisees often.
Wow. Yes, he did.
Yes.
And rightly so. Oh my goodness. So I know we talked a little bit about this just maybe a few minutes ago, but understanding now this millennial reign of Christ that could be taking place within the next 50 years or so. I mean, that's a huge statement, and that's a like, wow, we better get ready.
Yes.
Jesus is coming soon. Can you explain, just the power of understanding that timeline, and then what does that look like for us in modern day time? Like, what should we be looking at, and how should we be preparing? What are some things as believers and non-believers that you think, based on this timeline, that we should be working towards based on this calendar prediction?
Well, first of all, we need to be spreading the gospel to every nation on the face of the earth. And we've almost done that. And Jesus himself said that once the gospel had reached the ends of the earth, all the nations of the earth, that the end would come. And that's where we're at. The gospel has almost reached every nation and tribe on the face of the earth. But we need to pray about what we specifically should do. We need more missionaries. We need more teachers. We need more pastors. And we need to be teaching the truth of what the gospel says. Sometimes we've drifted from the truth that God loves us. He sent his son to save us. We need to accept Jesus as our Savior. We need to go back to the basics and understand that the time is short. And if we live through some of the birth pains, as Jesus called them, the events that take place before the tribulation, we need to be prepared. We need to have a firm faith in God, a firm foundation of faith that no matter what happens, we don't lose our faith because there's an earthquake or there's a war. And also, we watch what happens in Israel. Whatever happens in Israel, that's the timeline, because all of the prophecies basically revolve around the city of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. And here's something that happened recently that I found fascinating. We just, in February the 28th, on a Saturday, the U.S. and Israel killed the Ayatollah in Iran. Well, on the Essene calendar, that was the beginning of Purim, which is the celebration of the death of Haman in the book of Esther. So it's interesting that in today's time, we saw a fulfillment of that, where the modern day Haman was killed according to the Essene calendar on the date that they began celebrating Purim. It was not the same as the date for Purim on the Jewish calendar, but on the Essene calendar, it was the same day that this terrible dictator in Iran was murdered. So that's fascinating that it seems to align with the Essene calendar.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I mean, I understand that you understand this, and probably several others. Where can people find out this type of information? Like, if somebody said, I want to start really following the Essene calendar, how do they do that, and where do they go about doing that? I do want to point people to your website as well. But I mean, everything you're sharing to me is just incredible and fascinating. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's just really getting stirred up and more curious about what it is that you're sharing.
Well, one place is I do send out a newsletter now almost every week, and I do a lot of teaching on the Essenes. And people can sign up for my newsletter at the bottom of my homepage. There's a subscription place where you can enter your name and email address, and you'll receive my newsletter. There's also teaching on my website, but a lot of what I have learned about the Essenes is from a man named Dr. Ken Johnson. He has a YouTube channel. He has a website. He does a lot of teaching, but quite often his teaching will be for an hour. And what I've done is I've tried to compile the important parts of his hour-long teaching and put it into a newsletter, because I have watched literally hours and hours of his teaching. There are other people around the world that I've started to follow that are teaching on the Essenes. This seems to be a new topic of interest that has popped up just recently because of this calendar. As far as I know, Dr. Ken Johnson is the only person who has taken the Dead Sea Scrolls, found the calendar, and then aligned it with our Gregorian calendar so we can see what dates on the Essene calendar match up with our calendar.
Wow, that's so great. I love that. Well, thank you so much for giving us all of this information and sharing your book with us. I'm so excited. I'm personally excited to order your book, and so I'm going to be pointing everybody there as well. But I do have one more question now regarding the Essenes. Is there who would the um how would I want who would the descendants of the Essenes be today?
Well, it's interesting. The Essenes were actually Jewish people, Jewish men, during the time of Jesus. But it is what most people believe now that we've discovered who they are and what they believe. Their beliefs, their teachings align with early Christianity. In fact, Christianity even today. But on the day of Pentecost, when there's a verse that says, "And many of the priests believed on Jesus as the Messiah." Dr. Ken Johnson believes those were the Essene priests. And so many of the Essenes became the early Christians, the first Christians, because they prophesied when the Messiah would come, when he did. They prophesied his name. They recognized that his teaching aligned with what they had prophesied. So many of the Essenes did believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and they became some of the first Christians.
Wow, I love that. That's so interesting. And you don't really hear, I mean, yes, we hear about the early believers, but just in terms of even the prophetic word, that's just something that's a little bit more newer to me, even hearing and learning that there were a group or a sect of Israeli or Jewish believers who had already understood the prophecies because they were also part of declaring and writing and keeping record of the prophetic word of the coming of Jesus. And so interesting. So, we just celebrated Palm Sunday, and now then tomorrow being Tuesday would be the actual day that you're saying that Passover would have taken place. Is that correct?
Tuesday night, on the Jewish calendar, the day starts in the evening. So from Tuesday evening till Wednesday evening would be Passover on the Essene calendar.
Yes.
The
Wow.
Last
Amazing.
Supper would have taken place on a Tuesday evening after sundown.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much, Gail, for coming and just bringing all of this beautiful, like just newness. Talk about a new thing
Right.
and learn, right? I think all of us just learned a new thing. And so I want to thank you so much for that. But, for those of you that would love to dive deeper into the Essenes or even just to get Gail's book, on the way of the shepherd. Again, just such a beautiful concept, and I'm excited to order it myself or just to stay connected to her work. We would love for you to follow her website. Visit the website. She's got this newsletter. Her website is ngcarraway.com. And I'm sure as you navigate her website, you will be finding other things. And also you do teach about the Essenes as well. And so
Yes.
just head on over to that website, follow Gail, follow her work. She's working on this new book. And I'm listening to your how it's a trilogy. And I love that the first being about the shepherds. And I'm like, how brilliant that this one is the ministry of Jesus, the good
Mhm.
shepherd.
Right.
Wow.
In fact, the first book was called Journey on the Ancient Path, The Way of the Shepherd. The second one is Journey on the Ancient Path, The Truth of the Shepherd. The third one will be Journey on the Ancient Path, The Way, the Truth, and the Life of the Shepherd. So I
Wow.
took that from the scriptures about the way, the truth, and the life. And
Woo!
the first book was just basically the birth of Jesus through the time he was 12 years old. The second book will probably end on the day of Pentecost. The third book will start on the day of Pentecost and go through at least 70 AD when the Jewish temple was destroyed and explain how the early Christian church started. It was mainly Jewish, but then Gentiles came in. And what happened between the Jews and the Gentiles. It breaks my heart that the Jews and the Gentiles today are so far apart, even though we have the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so this third book will show how that division happened and go through the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD.
Wow. Well, I look forward to that book. I look forward to you finishing your second book of the series, and I am thrilled about purchasing your first book of the trilogy. And so do visit her website, please, njcarraway.com. Be sure to scroll to the bottom of that homepage, sign up for her newsletter, stay up to date on her upcoming teachings, events, and future books. And Gail, I want to thank you so much just for coming and sharing your heart and your it's not just research, it's your studies. And I believe it's just a huge part and portion of not just who you are, but what God has specifically called you to do. And it's been incredible. It's been fascinating and a very faith building conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we say goodbye?
Just to share with someone who may be feeling inspired to do something, but it's outside of your comfort zone. I would have never thought I would be doing this, writing my second book, being on an interview on a podcast. That was not in my comfort zone. So if someone feels inspired by God to do something, just really do it and just trust God that He will lead you every step of the way, and He will open the doors that should be open, and you'll be so glad you did.
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm so glad that you did. It's such an honor to meet you and have you as a part of not just our Influence Women Nashville chapter, but to be a part of our new series in collaboration with Influence Women, which is Women Influencing Nashville. Gail, you're a joy and a delight, a scholar, a teacher, and we've just enjoyed having you. And I would love to have you back as your journey continues.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a joy having you, everybody. Gail Carraway. Wow. Well, this to me has been so fascinating. I love history. I love the history of the Bible. And I'll tell you, it wasn't until I studied Hebrew in seminary that all of a sudden I began to understand and desire to learn and to know more. And so had the opportunity of being able to travel to Israel myself in 2022. And there's just something about being where Jesus walked. And when you have read the Bible and then you're reading and you're visiting places, to be some of these places where, David was writing his Psalms and En-Gedi, and to be on the Sea of Galilee, it's just like, wow, it's so incredible. And so such a joy and a delight to have Gail on the show. Please do visit her website. It's also in the chat for those of you that are watching on live stream. And if you're catching the tail end of it, you can go down into the description of our YouTube channel on this video and copy and paste and then head on over there. But I truly believe you will be blessed and more learned just by visiting her website. So, and listen, if you're a creative woman of faith, author, speaker, podcaster, entrepreneur, leader, and you are looking for an incredible faith-based community where you can grow and collaborate, use your voice, and also just to grow like with women like Gail. That's how I met Gail, was through Influence Women. Then I would love to invite you to become a part of our Influence Women community. Visit us at influencewomen.org. You can learn more and you can connect with us there. And then again, I want to thank you so much for joining and subscribing to this channel. If you have not yet done so, please subscribe to this channel. Share this channel, but also do share today's episode with anybody that you know would be blessed by it. And until next time, keep leaning into what God has in store for you and keep stepping into the new thing that He's called you to do, because why? He is always doing a new thing. All right, you guys, be blessed. We'll see you next week on a new thing. Hey, help us get the word out about our show. Subscribe today, right now, to A New Thing Live.